I am Legionarius Decimus Helvidius Rufus, and I am here today because you, the people, Vox Populi, asked me to react to preview to trailer of Gladiator Secundus, starring hero of mine, Decimus Meridius Maximus. Roma Victor! Roma Victor! Roma Victoris, Roma Victor, ego, Roma Victoris. We watched the trailer. Make go.
They can eat war.
Quid hoc et ubi est Maximus? Yes, I know he is died in first film, but I expected him to see apud inferos in Hades. This preview has disappointed me. So today, let's talk about the new trailer for Gladiator II that's coming out this year, about the historical context of this film and the Gladiator franchise. All roads lead to Rome, but the makers of the Gladiator movies lost their way long ago. Let me show you exactly where. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. Well, let's see if we can find any Latin in this Gladiator II trailer. Well, I'll be an emperor's uncle. There is some Latin in this trailer. Haec est gloria Romae in mundo. And it's on some sort of triumphal arch, it looks like. That's right in front of the Colosseum. Not sure that triumphal arch ever existed right there. And that inscription, too, doesn't quite seem historical. I assume it's mostly there to refer to the Colosseum. Haec est gloria Romae in mundo. That the Colosseum is the glory of Rome and the world, as a sort of a cynical way to understand the Roman Empire as not necessarily a force for good, which I'm all for that kind of deconstruction of the importance and the lionizing of ancient Rome. You know, it had a lot of good things, but obviously not a lot of other things we probably shouldn't imitate in the modern day. So I definitely think that's worth doing. But but this is well-written Latin, and that's good. But you out there, don't you want to learn Latin? Why haven't you learned Latin yet? Well, guess what? You can learn Latin with me, with my story learning course, with the novella I have written, Vir Petasātus, The Man in the Hat, part of the Latin Uncovered course. Taking place in the present day, the story of Vir Petasātus follows 3 Latin-speaking adventurers who travel to Italy to unearth ancient mysteries that will shock and astound you. And since the story is written entirely in Latin, you'll be learning the language by means of that entertaining story, hence story learning. My story is written in Latin, but through video lessons taught by me, along with detailed explanations of the vocabulary and the cognates and the grammar, you'll learn all the basics of the Latin language while on this exciting venture with the main characters. My Latin course on story learning is for anyone who wants to get a jump start learning the language in a challenging and very exciting way, because you'll get exposed to all forms of Latin idiomatic expressions. You'll have the whole audiobook recited to you in both ecclesiastical and classical pronunciations. This course is especially useful for people who want to move at their own pace, who want to move either faster or slower, flexibly on their own schedule instead of going with a class. That way you can learn all the basics of Latin while remembering all this new vocabulary, all these expressions, all this grammar in the context of these characters fighting for their lives. Come with me on this guided journey into the Latin language. You won't regret it. Sign up for the course. There's a 50% summer discount going on right now, but only if you use the link in the description.
What is Rome, Maximus?
I've seen much of the rest of the world. It is brutal and cruel and dark. Rome is the light.
You have not seen what it has become.
I really miss Dumbledore. And did you hear that beautiful, voiceless what?
You can only whisper it.
What a champ. Richard Harris is the best. He is playing, of course, Marcus Aurelius, philosophizing.
Will I be known as the philosopher, the warrior, the tyrant?
With Russell Crowe's Maximus. And I really like this, especially compared with the Haec est gloria Romae in mundo, as a way to investigate as much as we can from our modern perspective the meaning of Rome, of civilization, a civilization that was filled with barbarity, but also a lot of things that we have received into our society and civilization. We give a lot of credit where it's due to the ancient Romans, and of course the ancient Greeks and other civilizations and cultures that have contributed to ours, and rightly so, while we should always be, critical of the things that were done strangely or wrong. And anyway, very interesting. And I hope that the second movie has at least a little bit of this investigation, because I think the first movie did a good job of showing what can happen with an autocratic society. You have a good autocrat in the form of Marcus Aurelius, who this character, this is not historical as far as I know, Marcus Aurelius wanting to give the power back to the people, back to the Senate, to try to restore the Republic. And then Commodus, who is, of course, a brute and highly tyrannical. Historically, as you know, Commodus was not killed in the arena by any gladiator or Maximus himself, though he was killed in his bathtub, as I recall, by an athlete. Kind of similar. So we already know that Gladiator, the original movie, is not particularly historical, though it is inspired by historical characters and events.
There are victories yet still to come.
And speaking of historical context, where in the timeline is this second movie set? Well, it appears to be during the reign of Caracalla and his brother Geta and Caracalla. Caracalla was the older brother who ended up killing Geta after just a couple of years of their simultaneous reign. So this is about a generation after the original Gladiator film, right? And the main character appears to be Lucius Verus, the son of Lucius Verus, Lucius Verus, the husband of Lucilla. We see Lucilla in the original film, so what about Lucilla? So Lucilla, she, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius, was married to Lucius Verus, and Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius were co-emperors. That was, if I recall, the first time that it actually happened. This would happen more in later antiquity. But Lucius Verus, the husband of Lucilla, the co-emperor, he ended up dying in battle, if I recall correctly. Marcus Aurelius continues to rule until his own death, I believe, of natural causes. Now, here's the thing about Lucius, the little boy that we see in the film, in the original Gladiator film. He should be dead by the time that we see him, because he died, as far as we know, of natural causes. Many people died young, of course, before modern medicine, whether they were, the wealthy or the poor. Very sad. So Lucius, the little boy, the son of Lucius Verus and Lucilla, should not be in the original Gladiator film at all. In fact, now that I think of it, maybe we should think of all of this, since we're used to multiverses now, that this Gladiator franchise is really an alternate timeline, a kind of an alternate history hub with Cody. I got Cody's book, by the way. I really like it. So if that's the case, then this is a timeline where Lucius, the son of Lucius Verus, he lives. He doesn't die. And that would allow a lot of things to happen differently. Because, what else is different? Lucilla shouldn't be in the second movie at all, because she was exiled by Commodus. You know why? Because she plotted to overthrow him. So how did that plot go down? Well, let's see if I remember all the characters in play. There was, leading it, Lucilla, along with her daughter, Plautia. So her daughter, a Praetorian prefect, the nephew of her husband, a former consul, and that former consul's sister. So all sorts of really cool palace intrigue going on there. And who was to do the deed? That was Quincianus, the nephew of Quincianus, the husband. Anyway, so this is what happened. Quincianus is ready in the shadows, ready to kill Commodus with a dagger, and then he storms out, and instead of delivering the final blow, before he says, hold on, let me look up the Cassius Dio quote. I'll use the Samosatine variant of Lucian pronunciation, since that's appropriate for the time period. Xipos garante aute te sesotu stenochoria anatinas, idu efe, tu tosoi he vole pepom fen. He says, here is what the Senate sends you. But because he was an idiot, since it's not necessary to make these declarations before doing the assassination, in my opinion, looking at history, who stops him? But of course, the Praetorian Guard. Commodus's guards stop him, and of course he's killed shortly thereafter. And the conspirators are found or killed or exiled. Lucilla was exiled to Capri, and she was killed there shortly thereafter. All the conspirators were dead. Plautia, she was killed along with her mother on Capri, and her son Pompeianus was also killed by Caracalla. So there was complete extirpation of the line there. So, that would be a great story, wouldn't it? Instead, actually, it's so interesting what happened to the life of Lucilla. I wish that were a movie. She was married as barely a teenager to a much older man, the original Lucius Verus. She had to deal with all of that. She had several children, died when they were young, which is very sad. She was empress, and then when her husband died, whether or not she should even keep the title of empress was in doubt. All this kind of palace intrigue stuff, it would make for great stories, certainly great books, but I would say great TV, great movies. And I like the original Gladiator movie as far as the story and the drama and how well it's done. And Lucilla is thankfully a character in that, but I think she should have been a main character of her own film, especially one that's more historical. It's interesting, too, when you read about history, it's way more interesting sometimes than what filmmakers come up with. And I think it's a shame that a lot of filmmakers and TV showrunners aren't more courageous in their adaptation of real events. That's why I really like the Rome TV show, because it mostly adheres to real big historical events. It doesn't stray too far, while it adds a lot of imagination of things happening behind the scenes to certain characters who were just, footnotes in history, like Lucius Verus and Titus Pullo, who didn't have, very unlikely they had the amazing story that we got in that show. But it still coincides reasonably well with history that we can accept it as a version of reality. Whereas the Gladiator original movie and this one too, probably not. Because the main character is Lucius Verus, son of Lucius Verus and Lucilla, and he should be dead. So this is an alternate timeline completely. There are other things to complain about in the trailer. Why don't we complain? Let's complain. Metatron already did a great video with his reaction to the trailer, and he, of course, knows way more about the armor and the details of the iconography that we should be seeing in a period piece like this. One in particular that I think is worth mentioning is that for hundreds of years, our idea of ancient Roman architecture and sculptures is that they were simply the color of the material, that they were simply the bronze color or the marble color, whether that was white or black or whatever. But they were painted. They were painted. The columns themselves, if they had any natural color, they were burnished so that those reds, those blues would really stand out. And they were painted otherwise. All of the buildings would have been very decorative, very colorful. So the white look of all the marble, in addition to being a little boring. I mean, it's not bad looking, but it's a shame that still in the 21st century, filmmakers aren't well educated enough on this subject or courageous enough to put in historical details like that, because that helps to really bring you in to the reality, I think. We can have fantastic, bizarre gladiators riding rhinocerotes in the Colosseum, which shouldn't be flooded in the century of Gladiator because they had built the Hypogeum. It could only be flooded in the early years of its being in service. But anyway, besides all that, it would be nice to have those kinds of aesthetic details and all the armor and all the colors. And this is not hard to do. You don't need to invent things to make ancient Rome look amazing and cool and fantastic. If we adhere to historical details, we will make something that's absolutely better than most fantasies that filmmakers could come up with. That's how I see historical dramas and television and film like this. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. And speaking of historical details, something that bothered me about the first film Gladiator, once I knew enough about the layout of the ancient city, is that this is not what Rome looks like at all. It's meant to look even more, I guess, taller, filled with buildings just kind of crammed in there, when we know what the city looked like in this time period. I really recommend History in 3D, a wonderful YouTube channel where we get to see in extraordinarily realistic detail what ancient Rome looked like in its layout, the actual scale of things. The Colosseum is really huge. It's very big, but it's not as big as it looks in the original Gladiator film, especially from the outside and all these buildings. And I kept feeling so perplexed when watching the original Gladiator film. I saw it, I think, a couple years ago. I remember watching it with my dad. He wanted to see it again, which was nice. I'm glad we saw it. And I remember thinking and commenting to him, wait a minute, this is not what the city looked like. There's the Colosseum here and this other building here, this other temple. Like, this is wrong. This can't possibly be. So why do that? I know they did that in the original Gladiator film to, just make the city look, I guess, larger than life and strange from my perspective. And they're doing that again here. It looks ever so slightly more realistic to me, but still things are in the wrong positions and it just doesn't make sense as a layout as far as I can see. I like this shot. I haven't analyzed it to see if it really makes sense with all the pieces, but again, this is where I ask why. There's no narrative reason to get this wrong. It just seems like, well, we're just going to do whatever instead of doing something that's really precise and historically accurate. I guess this is sort of an artisan's point of view. Not that I'm an artisan, but I really respect detailed craft. Like when you can get so precise about things, all the information is there, why not do that? How much more effort and money really would it take to do it right? Another historical detail that occurs to me is that of the age of the main character here. At least I think he's the main character, which is Lucius Verus, the son of Lucilla and Lucius Aurelius Verus. So I don't believe there is a precise birth date for him, but his father died in 169 AD. So let's just ballpark and just 170 to make it real simple for back of the envelope calculations. This is public math, so forgive me if I get anything wrong. So he was born at the latest about 170. But this film was taking place during the duarchy, if that is that a word, of the two emperors, Caracalla and Jeddah. Jeddah was only emperor along with his brother for 2 years before he was killed in 211. So let's say he's about 210. Okay, that means that Lucius Verus has to be at least 40 years old when appearing in this film, or thereabouts. In Gladiator II, though, he's portrayed by Paul Mescal, who was born in 96. So he's about 12 years too young. I know maybe that's splitting hairs, but, why not lean into the historical details? I doubt there will be that much commentary, that much reference to his being practically middle-aged, which is interesting. Anyway, it's probably something that they didn't even think about, is my guess, when they put this movie together. I mean, look, Lucilla is still alive when she clearly was very dead by now. Very assassinated by Commodus. So Gladiator II and the whole franchise isn't just incorrect depiction of history, it's fan fiction. This is alternate history, and we should appreciate and enjoy it on that level only. So where do the gladiator games come from? Are they originally Roman? Well, they seem to have been originally Italian. Ancient historians wondered whether they were in fact Etruscan or Campanian, Campania. That's Campania, that region in Italy. That's where the city of Naples is located. It's south of Rome, to give you an idea of the geography there. And Etruscans, of course, Etruria. That's Tuscany today. It seems that most scholars today believe that indeed, Campania, that is the origin of the gladiatorial combat, that it was done in conjunction with the First Punic War, that involved retribution against the Samnites, the idea of people fighting to death. So this is definitely a Roman kind of thing, a very more originally Roman thing. Something the Romans, we can imagine, definitely didn't really borrow from the Greeks. So hey, there's one. There's one for the Romans. They gained in popularity and were used especially by politicians to entertain the people, just as sporting events today are sponsored by any number of individuals or companies. Heck, we have half of our stadiums that are named after brands. Or do I mean stadia? These events during their peak, which happens to be the classical Roman period, 1st century BC to 2nd century AD, were really extravagant, could be very expensive, and they seem to really entertain the people. Hence, Vespasian, of course, creating the Colosseum, an amphitheater designed to do many things. Certainly, they did gladiatorial combat there, but not exclusively. They also had things that were much worse, which was to have prisoners eaten to death by animals like lions. And like I mentioned before, the Colosseum in its early years could be flooded to do mock naval battles. That would have been really spectacular to see. Could not have happened in the early 3rd century, of course, because the Hypogeum that was constructed after underneath the arena to do a lot of other things. But it was something, those mock naval battles were things that actually happened, the naumachia. Really cool stuff. The decline of the gladiatorial games seems to coincide with the biggest decline of the Roman Empire itself, and that was the 3rd century crisis. All sorts of crazy things were happening. The economy just went haywire, and the emperors every 5 minutes. It was a mess. It was terrible. The literature wasn't great either. So the 3rd century crisis which then culminates early 4th century, 5th century. Things started getting better and Rome recovers to a degree, but not the gladiatorial games. Eventually, Constantine seems to be the first to ban these games, especially in a Christian context. More Christian emperors ban the games, and then Honorius finally bans the games entirely in 399 AD. And that seems to be the end of them, at least in the Western Roman Empire. So that is some context to appreciate or critique the new Gladiator II film that's coming out soon. Let me know what you think of the trailer in the comments. If you get to see the film and you want to leave a comment later on after the film comes out, then please do. Let's talk about it. I appreciate, in general, all media that is making an attempt to explore history, even if it's alternate history fan fiction, to explore the Latin language, even if it's just one inscription that probably never existed on a triumphal column in front of the Colosseum. All of that is good. All of this allows us to think and to reflect about the ancient society, what we have received from that society that we appreciate, that we want to maintain, and where that society deserves our critiques of society, the movie, all of these things. We should all take a thoughtful moment to examine, much as Marcus Aurelius in the original Gladiator film.
What is Rome?
Rome is the light.
There was once a dream that was Rome. Anything more than a whisper, and it would vanish.
Gratias vobisummas. Don't forget, if you want to learn Latin with me, sign up at the link in the description for my story learning course, Latin Uncovered. And thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, valete kai hygienete.